Welcome back to Baby Steps in This Together. This is an episode that I probably should have started off with before diving into other people's stories, but as much of a planner as I am, I just got an idea into my head and then dove right into it without really planning it out too well. So for those of you that may subscribe to my YouTube channel or know me in person, you may know a lot of this story already, but this podcast is basically going to be a more in-depth look into my journey so far. So where do I even begin with this? Let's roll it back like 10 years, if not more. I've always wanted to be a mom, and I know that sounds super cliche. A lot of people say, oh, I'm meant to be a mom, I'm destined to be a mom, but I truly do feel that way, and I've always felt like it would be something that I would be good at. It's the one thing that I've never really worried if I would be good at it or not. Whereas a lot of other things, I have a lot of anxieties about trying new things because I'm not sure if I'm going to do well at it. Being a mom is one thing that I had no doubts about. One of the reasons for this is I'm the oldest of about 20 cousins, and I grew up really close to them, and I've always been kind of a pillar in my family in terms of someone that my younger cousins look up to a lot, and I really enjoy playing that role in my family. So basically from there, I've always wanted to be a mom, and I almost wished that I could fast forward my life to the point where it would be okay for me to have kids, because obviously for a long time when I was in high school, it wasn't really the best time for that, and despite wanting to be a mom so bad, I was incredibly paranoid. I cannot stress this enough about getting pregnant as a teenager. And I wasn't even having sex in high school. So I don't know why I was so scared of it, as if it were even a possibility. But fast forward, I, for a long time, have been an avid user of YouTube ever since it began back in, I think, 2006 or something like that, or even before then, watching it back in the Smosh days and the OG YouTubers. A lot of the time, I ended up following a lot of family YouTubers, and a lot of these family YouTubers had a theme amongst them, and that theme was that they were each struggling with some type of infertility issue, or they were having problems building their family. One of these families was Daily Bumps, and they're still very popular on YouTube today as family bloggers, but I don't really watch them as much now because they quite quickly became very unrelatable, I guess, to me. So the issues they were struggling with was having multiple losses. So Missy had no issues getting pregnant. In fact, they got pregnant pretty much immediately, first try every time, but they kept losing it. And she ended up having what's called a Bicornuate Uterus, which meant there was basically a septum separating almost her entire uterus in half, which was a bit heart-shaped instead of kind of shaped like a kidney being like it should be. And so that was the reason that she kept having losses, was because the baby would run out of room to grow. And it was a miracle that she had her first son, because the placenta happened to grow on one side and her son Oliver was growing on the other. So that's like the only reason that he even survived to almost full term. So I was watching them a lot. And then there was also Ellie and Jared, who Ellie has PCOS, and they struggled getting pregnant as well. When they finally had their first son, Jackson, it was after many fertility treatments, and then they miraculously got pregnant with their second son, Calvin, like pretty much right after she had Jackson, and she was really shocked, and it was a wonderful surprise. And then lastly, I was watching Cullen and Katie, and again, they were dealing with multiple losses as well, although I'm not quite sure what their diagnosis was to explain that. But long story short, I was following a lot of family YouTubers that were going through infertility problems, and at the time, I was thinking in my early 20s when I started watching a lot of them, and I wasn't planning on having kids anytime soon. I wasn't married yet or anything like that. So I look back and I wonder, what was it about these families that I was so interested in watching? And it was because I felt like I related to them, even though I wasn't going through it at the time. But watching them and learning as much as I did, I just felt some type of connection, and I felt like that was going to be me someday. And so I really put in a lot of time, even reading blogs and forums and all of this stuff about infertility issues way, way before it was even a reality to us, which is a weird thing to think about. And I always wonder if other people have these types of intuitive thoughts, because it's happened to me several times. There's been several times in my life where I'll think of something, or I'll see something, or I'll just feel something, or even dream something. It's like this weird intuition that I have where I just feel it in my gut and just in my soul. I don't know how else to explain it, but I feel it in my soul that, this is going to happen, or this isn't going to happen, or some type of thing. Sometimes I'll dream about something, and most of the dream will be a completely normal dream. I often have very vivid dreams, and I remember them a lot too. So I'll have a dream about something, and it'll be a normal dream, and then all of a sudden something changes about it. And then it feels like a premonition, which is weird. I'll wake up with a completely different feeling, and I'll remember all the parts of the dream that felt like a normal dream. And then I remember the parts that felt different to me, and whether that involved a certain person or something was said. Typically it involves a person, whether that person said something to me that triggered that feeling, or whether it was just the fact that they were in my dream at all when it's not someone I don't usually dream about. Those were kind of like indicators. And oftentimes I've reached out to those people after the fact just to check in and be like, hey, how are you doing? And more times than not, there's been something going on in their life, like they're struggling with something or they're going through something, and it's just really weird. So this feeling that I would someday be struggling with infertility was in the same vein as all of that, and I hate to say that I was right. So fast forwarding to like 2017, before Peter and I got married, we were talking about when we would want to try to start having kids. And it was kind of a bit of a debate for a little bit for us because he didn't think he was quite ready to start having children. Whereas obviously I wanted to start like 3 years ago, I was already late at that point in my head in terms of my personal timeline. The plan was that I was going to stop taking birth control right after the wedding, and that's exactly what I did. The compromise that Peter and I came to was that we would start trying in May of 2018. So that's a solid 9 months from when we got married. Almost the length of a pregnancy, ironically enough. Initially, he wanted to wait much longer, and I wanted to start immediately. So that was kind of the middle ground a little bit. And we chose May 1st because that was our dating anniversary, so we thought it would be kind of special. But even though we were trying in May, I still wanted to come off my birth control earlier just so I could get a sense of what my cycles were like, because I had been on the birth control pill for over 10 years at that point. Pretty much since I was 18 is when I started it. And previous to that, back in high school, my cycles were pretty irregular, and I used to have really, really bad cramps. So those were a couple things that I was nervous about happening again. But my cycles ended up being fairly regular enough that it wasn't, out of the ordinary. And I didn't really have cramps anymore, so I was super thankful for that. And that's one thing I was really scared of coming back. Bianca Belisian, who my last podcast was with, spoke to this a little bit, and it was so funny when she was telling me her story. I related to so much of it because I feel like we all go through so many of the same emotions when going through this whole process. So remember, in the back of my mind, before we started trying, I didn't want to wait because I had that feeling that we would struggle with infertility. So it was a really, really hard pill for me to swallow to be able to even wait those 9 months to start building our family. And when we did, it was actually more terrifying than exciting for me. I really thought that I would be excited, today's the day, we're gonna start our family, who knows, this could be the month, you never know. It does happen on the first try for a lot of people. For a lot of people it doesn't, but it can happen. So I thought that my hopes would be super high. I thought I would be super excited and all lovey-dovey and mushy and emotional and all that. But I was pretty much just scared. It was just fear and anxiety because this was the first time that I was facing my greatest fear head on. And my greatest fear was that I would find out someday that I'd never be able to have children. Yeah, it was a complicated feeling that I'd never felt before. But it was scary. And it was still a little bit exciting, but a few months went by and I wasn't really tracking my ovulation at this point. I was just tracking when my period would start and stop, just to get a sense of how long my cycles were. And I think we went about 3 cycles with no success when I thought, okay, I'm going to start tracking my ovulation. So I bought the ovulation strips, the cheapy Wandfo brand on Amazon, and I started tracking. And then that is when I found out that apparently I was ovulating way later than I thought I was. I use this app called Clue to track my cycle, and initially, if you're not giving it ovulation test information, then it's just going to assume you're the average person who ovulates day 14 or 15. So that's kind of what it was estimating for me up to that point. But in reality, I was getting positive ovulation tests on day 19 and 20, which was pretty late in my cycle. And this became a concern because my luteal phase was only 10 days. And basically what that means is the time between my positive ovulation test and when my period would start was only 10 days long. And this is often not long enough for a fertilized egg to turn into an embryo and make its way down to the uterus to implant. It's like right on the cusp of not being enough time. So I thought maybe that was the reason it wasn't happening, and it was kind of a concern at that point. And that was already something that I was pinpointing outside of everything else we found out later. So 3 more months went by and I was still consistently ovulating day 19 or 20. One other thing to note is previous to that, I didn't bother taking ovulation tests because I thought I was ovulating day 14 or 15 because I was like consistently spotting during that time. And sometimes ovulation spotting can happen, so I thought that's what it was. Apparently it wasn't. It was just abnormal spotting, which was another concern. But yeah, so 3 months after that, we're at the 6-month mark. And at this point, I was already, itching to start talking to my doctor. So we went to my family doctor. I talked about my concerns with her, and of course, we got the normal response of, most of the time we ask that couples try for a year before referring them to an RE, which is a reproductive endocrinologist, basically a fertility specialist. So she said we could get like a couple blood tests done. I'm not even really sure what she was testing for at the time, but she said she couldn't really do too much outside of that. Apparently my results came back normal. I think it was just like regular array of blood tests, not really fertility specific. And at that point, I was already tired of just playing the go-between and having, the one doctor kind of preventing me from moving forward. So I started looking at fertility clinics in my area. And then that's when I found out that Lake Ridge Fertility in Whitby accepts self-referrals. So I very quickly hopped on that and referred myself to them and then got my appointment with Dr. Browning. And one thing I will say about Lake Ridge, and I'm going to make a whole video dedicated to why I chose Lake Ridge, but Dr. Browning isn't my favorite doctor. Just like the way he approached conversations and his demeanor and kind of bedside manner type thing wasn't really my jam. And Lake Ridge also doesn't do IVF services in-house, so if you ever want to do IVF right from the get-go, or if that's something that you think is in your future, then you'll have to be referred to an external IVF clinic, and Lake Ridge works specifically with Trio. But one thing about Lake Ridge is I love the nurses. I adore them. They are amazing. So yeah, shout out to the Lake Ridge fertility nurses. They are so kind. And honestly, like that, I love the clinic because it's never busy, especially now during the pandemic. Like you make your appointment and you're the only one in there. And it's just great. Very rarely have I had to wait in a busy waiting room for my appointment. And it's also just really nice. I think after my first visit, several of the nurses remembered my name, and that's not something that you'll get with a big clinic like Trio or Create or other places. So it's nice. As soon as you walk in, someone's like, "Hey Meg, come on back," and I'm like, "Hey," and then we catch up. They remember things about my work and ask about how certain things are going, and it's just super nice, and it just makes the whole process that much easier. So because I didn't see Dr. Browning very often, the relationship there didn't really matter that much to me. It really mattered more to me, my relationship with the nurses overall. So I think at this point, this is when I did start getting excited. I mean, I wasn't excited about having to get a million blood tests or several ultrasounds or my uterus filled with saline. None of those things were fun. And those are all things that you have to do when you get fertility testing, to kind of just start from square one and get all the basics down to see what's going on. But this is when I got excited because we were doing something new, and I felt like going to a fertility clinic was what was going to get us pregnant. And I had so much more confidence that it was going to happen and we were going to get answers. Now, not only was my fear not being able to get pregnant, but my fear was also being diagnosed with unexplained infertility. And this was just because I don't know how I would be able to deal with just not having answers, just them doing all of the tests and looking at everything they can, and then coming back with, well, I don't know why you can't get pregnant. Everything shows that you should be getting pregnant. And so that was a big fear for me at the time. So we got all the blood tests, and my doctor talked to us about 2 blood tests that were optional at an additional expense. Everything else was pretty much covered by OHIP, but one of the tests was to test for endometriosis. It's not super conclusive. I think the only way that they can really know if you have endometriosis is to actually go in there with a scope. But they were saying this blood test could give a better idea as to whether it might be an issue to look into. The other one was to test for AMH, which is anti-Mullerian hormone. And I was told that this was to measure for my ovarian reserve. And that little inkling feeling came back where I thought, I need to get the AMH test. I just had a feeling that I needed to get that one. I can't remember how much it cost, but we ended up going with that. And lo and behold, my AMH test was the only test that came back abnormal. I remember sitting in that chair with Peter while Dr. Browning was talking to us about our results, and, he was going through everything. He was saying, this is normal, this is normal, this is normal. And then I think the last thing that he brought up was the AMH test, and I was kind of getting my hopes up at that point, like, oh, good, like, everything is looking normal, like, maybe our fertility treatments will go pretty well. And then the AMH test came back at 3.7, and that was extremely low, he said. He said it was basically equivalent to what you would expect to see in someone in their late 30s, early 40s. And that was really hard to hear. Considering I've been so good with kids at a young age and I've been told that I'm an old soul on several occasions, it's kind of weird to think that apparently my body thinks it's older than it actually is as well. Basically what this means is my ovarian reserve showed that I had the amount of eggs that would be expected to see someone who's nearing menopause. And this was kind of another thing that clicked into place for me because I've joked about experiencing early menopause for years. Even back when I was in high school, it was like a running joke that I was premenopausal because I would have so many hot flashes. My friends would always make fun of me for like having to take my coat off outside in the dead of winter when I'm walking home and I get hot flashes halfway and then it's like a snowstorm and I'm holding my coat the rest of the way home. Or not being able to wear pullover sweaters or hoodies because I need to be able to unzip something and take it off so fast, like right away. Otherwise I start to panic and makes the hot flash worse. So that's been going on for a long time. And I genuinely don't know if it's actually related to my diagnosis or if it's just a really weird coincidence, but it's just another one of those weird things that happened and connects to other things in my life that happened years ago that just don't make sense to me. Or maybe they do make more sense now, I don't know. So at that point, we knew I had low AMH, and I was diagnosed with diminished ovarian reserve. Now, this isn't really necessarily a diagnosis because everything else points to me being able to get pregnant. It's just my body makes less eggs, but that's not necessarily meaning that they are poor quality eggs. I've been seeing a lot of contradicting information about whether AMH points to egg quality or not, but I think the vast majority says no. So with me being only 28 at the time, my egg quality should have still been okay. So why wouldn't I be getting pregnant then? Peter had no issues, we explored that as well, and so it wasn't an issue on his end. And I was ovulating regularly as far as we could tell, so in a way, it was kind of like I got an unexplained infertility diagnosis. But I try not to think about it that way. And at this point, IVF wasn't even on the table yet. It wasn't even really a thought in my mind, although I had researched it in the past. I had a feeling we might need to do it someday, but I didn't think it would be yet. So we started off with timed intercourse cycles, and basically what this means is I take very low dose medication to help grow my follicles, and then we're told when to do the deed at home at a specific time or day. I don't know if it's like this at every clinic, but Lakeridge kind of operates by rules of 3, kind of trying 3 timed intercourse cycles first before moving on to IUI, or trying 3 IUIs first before recommending for IVF, that kind of deal. So we did 3 timed intercourse cycles, no luck, and my God, the amount of pregnancy tests I've taken since we started this process is crazy. And for anyone that's seen my first video that I made when I announced the struggles that we were going through about my infertility journey, it's a video on my YouTube channel. When I was editing that, first of all, it was really hard to edit that just because I had just found out that my first IVF transfer had failed. But despite that, when I was going through all of my clips, I would film these clips and then just put them in a folder and not look at them again because it was too difficult. So I knew editing that video was going to be really hard. And surprisingly enough, the most difficult video for me to watch was the one where I'm sitting in my car about to go to my friend's house to take my first pregnancy test, and the one where I'm at her house taking the pregnancy test. I thought I would have a harder time seeing me, in the videos where I'm crying, or in the videos where I'm talking and the things that I'm saying. So I was watching all these videos and I was doing okay, and then I came across that video and it broke me. I couldn't I almost couldn't get through it, because I was watching that video and it was like I was watching a completely different person. I didn't know who that girl in the video was. She was optimistic, she was happy, she was getting ready to start a new life, she was excited. I wasn't like that anymore. So seeing that and realizing how much has changed since then, how much my mental health has changed and my mindset and how I feel about this whole process and just my outlook on life is worlds different than that day when I was sitting in my car telling the camera that I was going to take my first pregnancy test. So we did 3 of those, and then we wanted to move on to IUI. And it was the same medication, but this time it looked like that I had ovulated through the medication, and I had ovulated early when I went in for my ultrasound, so it was converted to a timed intercourse cycle. And by that point, I was just so frustrated. I was like, screw this. Like, according to my diagnosis, I don't got time to keep doing this over and over again. So, like, let's just go to IVF, even though statistically IVF might not be better, because actually, statistically, low AMH patients or diminished ovarian reserve patients aren't good IVF candidates because we don't make many follicles and we don't get many eggs or blastocysts. But I felt like IVF was the thing at this point. And so we got transferred to Trio. At Trio, my doctor is Dr. Kadeski, and initially I was really worried because I obviously look at reviews for everything on the internet, so I was nervous about having to start a new clinic, and a bigger clinic in downtown Toronto, no less. And anyone that knows me knows that I hate Toronto. I technically live in Toronto. I refuse to identify as a Torontonian. So I looked up reviews on Dr. Kadeski, and I was not really happy with what I was reading. There was quite a bit of negative reviews about him, honestly. But then I asked on a specific Facebook group, and a lot of people were saying that he was actually really great. Yes, he is a bit blunt, but he also has a sense of humor, and he's straight to the point, and he's really great at answering your questions. And a lot of the people that were just making bad reviews just didn't mesh with kind of his blunt, abrasive nature. But when I met him, it didn't feel that way to me at all. So, and someone else made a good point that people are a lot more likely to leave a negative review for something than to leave a positive review. Because when you experience something negatively, you want to tell the world. So I shouldn't rely so heavily on internet reviews for things. But he was great. He explained our situation and our, if the statistics were in our favor or not. I try not to think about the statistics too much because it doesn't really mean all that much to me. We had to get some more testing done. He wanted to get a bunch of the tests we'd had done again with their labs, just because he preferred their labs. So we did all that. And of course, don't forget, everything takes time. And one of the reasons that I even started looking for help at 6 months was because I knew it took a couple months to even get your first appointment, your first consultation with an IVF doctor or a fertility doctor. And that definitely was the case. I think we had to wait a month for our first appointment, and then a month again to switch clinics and start the IVF process. One of the tests that we got redone was my AMH test. And I was kind of nervous about getting this one redone, even though I did want to, but I was afraid about it being lower than it was initially. But the good news is that it actually came back at 6. So it was a lot better and kind of put me more in the range of mid-30s. But he did say it is still low, but I was just happy that it was not 3.7. It was better. And the fluctuation was more than a lot of people said is to be expected with AMH, because fluctuations are normal, but I don't think that much would be normal. So leading up to IVF, I think one of the things I was most scared of was the injections, but actually I thought I would be more scared of the injections than I actually ended up being, because I've always hated needles. I don't have a phobia necessarily, but I've never liked them. I knew I would never be able to do them myself, so I'm really glad that Peter has been there to be able to do them, and nothing really affects him, so he's had no issues with that. And he's gotten pretty good at it. We kind of have a system down. But it was also kind of scary too, because again, you know, my hopes had gone to an all-time low before doing IVF. But when we were starting IVF, it skyrocketed because now we were doing IVF. Like, this is the super fancy stuff. We're paying all this money. Like, it must work. This is the last thing we can possibly try. It's got to work. So that kind of thing was in my head. And it's really hard to keep myself grounded. And again, a lot of people that know me, I can be a really optimistic person when it comes to talking to people about their problems and kind of trying to like look on the bright side of things. But I'm also careful with that because I know it doesn't work for everyone, because I know it doesn't work for me. When people are too optimistic or positive, it's kind of damaging for me because I try not to get my hopes up. I don't want to get my hopes up because when things don't go that way or don't go well, then it's so much harder to recover from that. Whereas if I actually prepare for the worst, then at least I'm a bit more prepared. I'm a bit more stable and more ready to deal with whatever comes than if I'm just going into it with all this positivity and saying, yes, this is going to work. This is going to be amazing. It's going to work 100%. And just knowing that my chances are a lot lower than any other person going through IVF with my low AMH and diminished ovarian reserve, I need to be very conscious of that. And at the time I wasn't. And we went through the whole process. And at first I was a little bit discouraged. We didn't really see any measurable follicles until like day 5 or 6 or something like that. But what was exciting was that each time I went for an ultrasound, there was more follicles popping up. Now, don't get me wrong, like we only ended up with 7 total, but it was exciting kind of seeing them grow and having hope. But that's because that's not really the hard part. You think about IVF and you think the hard part is, oh my gosh, so many injections and so many drugs and oh my gosh, all the ultrasounds you have to have and all the blood work. But that's not the hard part at all. Like I'll take the ultrasounds. Me and that ultrasound probe, we're good friends now. We're great friends. I'll take the bruised inner elbows from all the blood work I have to take. I'll take the shots and I'll take the side effects from the drugs. That's all fine. The part that sucks is the part that comes after the retrieval, which is the waiting. I mean, the waiting throughout this whole process is the worst part, but the waiting and then the fact that your numbers pretty much just keep dropping. Each update you get is usually worse, and if it's not, then count your lucky stars. But even the retrieval experience, like I really enjoyed that experience, even though apart from the fact that I almost had a meltdown when they were trying to put in my IV, because I've never had an IV before, I think. But yeah, she had to poke me several times and I was starting to have a bit of a panic. The nurse even said I should have given you the Ativan first. But like the retrieval itself was painless. I didn't remember anything. I stayed conscious the whole time, and Peter was able to record a video of it, which was super cool because I was really interested in seeing how it all worked. And then afterwards was just kind of chilling in bed, a bit crampy, it's whatever, but it gave me an opportunity to relax and just watch some Netflix. But the waiting, man, oh God. Like we found out right away how many eggs we got. We got 7 eggs, which was great because that meant all my follicles that we were seeing on the ultrasound had eggs in them. And then from there, that's when everything starts going downhill. But it's hard not to think of it that way. You have to think of it as a win each time. Otherwise, it's just going to get you down every single time. I find it's better to kind of cheer for the ones that are making it rather than mourn the loss of the ones that didn't. So we had, gosh, it was so long ago now. I'm trying to remember the numbers. Out of 7 eggs, only 2 were mature, which was a shame. And I'm wondering if that had something to do with quality. But only 2 were mature. But luckily those 2 did fertilize. So technically, if we're looking on the bright side here, the fertilization rate of mature eggs was 100%. And yeah, so A+ for fertilization rate, really bad score for maturation rate. And then out of those 2 mature fertilized eggs, one of them made it to blast. The other one stopped growing after day 3, unfortunately. So we weren't initially doing PGS genetic testing anyways, because I didn't expect we would get very many embryos. So since we only had the one, the plan was to do a fresh transfer, and so we did a fresh 5-day transfer with that embryo. And then I know I said the other part was the worst part, but this was the worst part, because now I had to wait 2 weeks and take massive intramuscular progesterone injections in my upper ass, which were not fun. And even though they didn't really hurt that much, just the fact of knowing how long the needle was and that was going into my body was enough to make me almost panic every time. So in order to avoid that, Peter and I kind of had a routine where I would like warm up the oil and he would go warm up the little bean bag that they let me take home after my retrieval. And then I would play this cover of Let It Go on YouTube while he was doing the injection. Yeah, it's just to kind of try and take my mind off of it a bit. There was one time where I think he might have grazed my sciatic nerve, because that whole day I was out of commission. I could barely walk. My whole right leg was just stiff from all the way from my lower back all the way to my ankle. It was so painful. But luckily it did go away the next day. But I definitely decided to stay away from a certain part of those circles that my nurse drew on my butt. But the important thing that I was trying to remember at this point was, please, please, please let these injections be worth it. Because if it doesn't work out, if it's not a positive on my beta blood test day, I'm really going to not be happy about having to take these shots. So blood test day came. Obviously, I had been taking at-home pregnancy tests this whole time because I am a pee on a stick addict. And I cannot help myself, which is why I buy those cheapies on Amazon. And I saved the first response ones from Shoppers Drug Mart for the confirmations. But it was a negative, and that was probably the lowest point for me, because I didn't know where to go at that point. And this was a pay out of pocket cycle, because we were put on the wait list for the funded cycle, but it was like over a year long. And we decided to go ahead with a private cycle because I knew time wasn't on my side. And since egg quality was still a big question mark, I didn't want to wait. So we were lucky that we were able to afford a private cycle, but at this point, I didn't know what to do with myself. And so much of my life, I felt like I was putting on hold because I was waiting to have a baby. Like, so many things were contingent on that one thing. Like finishing the basement, starting my home daycare in the basement was contingent on me having a child. Doing something with the other bedrooms upstairs that weren't being used was contingent on having a baby, because I didn't want to go through all the trouble of redoing one of the rooms into my office or something like that in case I got pregnant this month or whatever. And then we would have to redo everything again. Or even just not being able to make travel plans. I mean, before the pandemic, now it's obviously not an option, but not being able to really go anywhere or plan ahead because, I don't know if I'm going to be pregnant then. Just so much of my life was just hanging on that one singular thing that was not happening in my life. So it essentially meant the rest of my life was on hold. And I didn't really feel like I was living my life anymore. And it just got worse after my IVF cycle failed, because I thought, well, who knows what we're doing next? I was kind of lost because I didn't know if we could afford another private cycle before I funded one. I didn't really know what was going to happen. So all this aside, and with the pandemic having started pretty much right before my retrieval, I was one of the last retrievals to be done before the clinics completely shut down back in March. I decided to take a couple months off of actively trying. And I don't know if you can hear it in my voice, but when I say actively trying, I'm making air finger quotes. Because obviously we weren't going to just start using protection or something, but what I mean is I wasn't going to actively track my ovulation or my cycle or really try and pay attention to the days, because I needed to just take a break. I needed my life to not be thinking about fertility-related, baby-related stuff for 24/7 every day of the week. I just needed a break. And I had also just put out my fertility journey video because I decided long ago that I was going to tell my story and start bringing more awareness to this topic, like many other people are doing out there on the internet. On International Fertility Week, I decided I was going to do that regardless of the outcome of our IVF cycle. So that decision was made, and honestly, I'm really glad that I went through with it because everyone has been super supportive. And I didn't realize how much it was weighing on me by keeping it a secret, even though over time I had been telling more and more people. Like, if anyone ended up asking me about kids, I'd pretty much blab to them about everything that was going on. But just keeping it a secret was really hard for me because I'm a very open person. I'm an open book. I need to talk about things. That's just the way that I cope with things, is I need to talk about it. So that was really good. And during this break, it was nice to kind of focus on that and just take some time off and focus on work and busy myself with other things and get back into my hobbies that I had not really done in a long time. And then I got pregnant. And hearing those words come out of my mouth just now feels weird because I still almost forget that did happen to me. It was my second cycle after the IVF cycle, and the first cycle is always kind of weird. I knew that it would be a bit wonky because of all the meds, but I go into more detail in my miscarriage videos when I tell the story about it on YouTube. But really briefly, my second cycle I just thought was super, super short because I had what I thought was my period like on day 15, which was half the length of my normal period. So I thought it was kind of evening out because my first cycle after my IVF was like 40 something days long. So I thought maybe it was just fixing itself and figuring its shit out. But I randomly decided to take a pregnancy test like a few days after that, again, air quotes, period ended. And it was very positive. Like, it was no question about it. It wasn't a squinter or anything. It was definitely positive right away. I watched the dye go across the test, which I don't usually do either. But I watched it go across the test, and as soon as it hit where that second line should be, it was pink, and it was there. And I couldn't believe it. Because after all this time that we've done fertility treatments and been trying and tracking and doing IVF, and none of it working, who in the hell would have thought that I would get pregnant naturally and by accident? Because we weren't really trying. I just don't even understand. We only had sex like twice that month. It's not even understatement. So that was really shocking. And I didn't know how to feel. I was literally terrified to be happy because I thought this was the world playing a cruel joke on me. And even when I was telling my friends and some of my family, I was shaking. I was shaking so bad. And it wasn't necessarily from happiness. It was because I was so terrified. I felt like I was lying to them. And I felt like I was playing a prank on them. And seeing them so happy and like crying for me and all this stuff made me feel guilty because I thought I was lying to them. I literally didn't believe it yet. And also because at that point I hadn't even gone to my doctor yet to like get a blood test and confirm it. But I did take several tests and they all said positive. But it was such a weird feeling. I was at war with myself about whether to wait to tell people. But again, I'm a sharer and I need to tell people, and it was hard enough keeping it to myself or just telling Peter. Like, it wasn't enough. I needed to tell my best friends and my mom and my dad, and I was trying to wait until I had the blood tests, but I didn't. And I'm still wondering if I regret telling people too early or not. I'm leaning on the side of not, because those videos are still some of my favorite things, even though they are hard for me to watch. I do have video recordings of the announcements that I made. And the fact is that I'm never going to get that first time again. I'm never going to get that first time telling my mom that I'm pregnant. That's done. And at least I have that on video. So then the day came. I had to wait a whole weekend to get my blood test because I found out on a Friday night. So that was unfortunate timing. So I got my first blood test on Monday, and it came back at 56. My HCG level was 56, which I kind of knew was quite low, but then also based on how far along I might be. Again, I didn't even really know because my cycles were really weird and I wasn't tracking. But she was telling me that it was around the normal level for where I should be expected. But the important thing is that it should double at my next test, which was 2 days later, 48 hours later. So I said, okay. I was very cautiously optimistic because at least that did confirm that I was pregnant, and I was hearing it from my nurses' mouths, which made it a lot more real to me and a lot more real to Peter. So then on Wednesday, I went back for my second test, and it was like 20 something. It had decreased by half, almost literally half. And I was told that it was likely a chemical pregnancy and that I was going to lose it. So I got a solid 3.5 days of being happy and telling people. And let me tell you, in those 3.5 days, it doesn't sound like a long time, But your whole world changes when you go through this for so long. And I've only been through it for a couple years at this point. I can't imagine how it would feel for someone going through it years and years and years, and then finally getting that positive test. Oh, finding out less than 4 days later, not even enjoying it for a week, that it wasn't happening. Because you don't know until you experience it. Before this, going into it, I thought that, at least if I had an early loss, like a really early loss, something that I wouldn't have known I was pregnant otherwise had I not been excessively tracking, then I thought I would be able to deal with it pretty well, because it was literally just like a clump of cells and was barely anything at that point. But the reality is that your entire world changes, the floodgates open, and your imagination goes wild. You literally start to imagine what this potential child could look like a combination of you and your significant other. What would that look like? Whose eyes will they have? What color hair will they have? What kind of skin tone? What would their voice sound like? You imagine what your house would be like when you're a parent, making pancakes for them in the morning, getting them ready for school, tucking them into bed at night. You start thinking about how you're going to decorate the nursery, just all these things, all at the same time. And it's honestly overwhelming. And it was completely uncontrollable at this point too, because up until then, I'd gotten pretty good at closing myself off from all of that. I didn't really let myself take in any baby-related stuff. I didn't look at it. I didn't search for it. I didn't think about it. I deleted any apps that I had for baby names and all of that stuff. I just didn't look at it. My Pinterest board has been closed for ages now, but all at once, there's nothing I could do to control it. All at once, I downloaded the apps again. I was on Pinterest. I was everywhere. I was Googling things. I was thinking about registries. I was literally going insane in a very short amount of time, might I add. So when I found out that I was losing it, and it was really hard, especially the timing, all of this made it really challenging too, because first of all, Mother's Day had just gone by. It was May. So that was one thing. It was sad, but then I did find out I was pregnant. So it was kind of like, oh wow, right after Mother's Day, I found out I was pregnant. So like, what kind of cruel fate is that? Life just couldn't give me a positive pregnancy test a month earlier so I could be pregnant for Mother's Day. It's those little things that just kind of get to you. And secondly, the fact that it became super special because we got pregnant exactly 2 years after we had started trying naturally. And it was the month that was the month of our dating anniversary. And the first day that cycle started was our dating anniversary, May 1st. So that became special about it. And then that became really cruel after we lost it a few days later. And the cherry on top of the figurative but quite literal birthday cake was that I was miscarrying on my 30th birthday. And up to this point, my goal was that, okay, I'm going to get pregnant before I'm 30. That was my ultimate goal. Before that, it was I wanted to be done having kids before I'm 30, but obviously that wasn't going to happen, so I kind of had to rethink that a bit. So I snuck it right in there. So not only did I get pregnant after Mother's Day and 2 years on our dating anniversary and right before my 30th birthday, but then I also, screw all that. The universe doesn't care about all that. You can miscarry on your birthday too. Surprise! Best birthday ever. It was really hard. I wasn't okay for a while. I didn't know how to process it. I didn't want to talk about it. I'm really grateful for my friends and my mom and family who were understanding and that I needed time just for myself and that I kind of disappeared for a couple days. And I didn't really start to feel better about it until me and Peter really had a good talk about it. And then I tried to focus on, at least I got pregnant. That is at least one step closer to the goal than I've ever been. And that's kind of what I'm trying to hold on to at this point. Yeah, that's pretty much my story. And I've recently decided to make my office upstairs, and I moved a bunch of stuff around, organized it, used pieces of furniture that weren't being used in other parts of the house because I was saving them for the daycare or some other thing. And I decided I'm just going to live my goddamn life, and I need to not keep waiting for this baby that may or may never come in order to do other things that I want to do, because that's not living. Anyways, thank you for listening to my story. It was a bit of a long one, and I'm sure there was even more that I could have gotten into. I might even make a part 2 to this. And if you're interested in being a guest on my podcast and want to tell your story, please feel free to reach out to me. I would love to speak with you, and hopefully I get a few more episodes lined up soon. Bye!